Chapter 29. Nothing allowed for a better cleansing of his mind than candles, a warm fire, wine, bath salts, and plenty of steamy mountain water. Only Kelin's nose and toes poked through the bath's surface. On the ceiling above him, the water's reflection danced like children at play. He wiggled his toes. He'd never had a bath where someone else hadn't used it first. It almost made the ordeal so far worthwhile. Almost. It certainly helped to drown the memories. He'd never had wine like this before, but it was filling, both sweet and smooth at the same time. He savored each taste. They said that it was only a thimbleful of alcohol in the glass, and the rest was water, but his head was still spinning. He settled for occasional sips as he relaxed into the warming hum it brought throughout his entire body. Someone had laid out new clothes, including shoes for him. He didn't ask where they'd taken his old clothes. With any luck, to burn them. But right now he was free and floating. The Kelin were still an ancient myth. He'd have to go back to the forge come sunrise. For now, he was safe. In a narrow, oval room, the elves seated themselves along mahogany benches. Daylight warmed the chamber through windows, and the surrounding stone walls were inlaid with glowing star patterns that led up to a dome overhead. Ivy covered the false lattice supports behind the benches, creating an illusion of summer. Off to the side, there was a table laden with an abundance of small foods. Nothing as large as a supper, but enough to sustain people for a long discussion. Sir Amthros, Knight Captain Jacob, Duke Farallon, Duchess Sabiel, several other elves, and Evelyn sat upright on the benches. Between them, an illusory map rose above the stone floor. The entire kingdom was detailed. The rivers flowed and the mountains soared with clouds and snow on their peaks. Caleb slouched in a high-backed chair at the head of the benches. Above him, a picture of a tree weathering through the 4 seasons adorned the chair. He eyed the food and his stomach rumbled in response, but he didn't want to eat. Farallon approached, carrying a small, full plate over to him. He held it out and smiled. The prince frowned. The other elf's expression appeared genuine. The duke said, "The lady and I have our disagreements, but no one cannot enjoy her dishes." "I'm grateful, my Lord Duke, but I can't seem to make myself hungry at the moment." "Very well." He retracted the plate. "Please let me know when you are." "I will, thank you." He offered his own stiff smile. "It is good to see your nose healed." The Duke fought back a scowl as he rubbed it. "Yes, Master Painter had wasted his supplies on that girl. Thankfully there were more supplies here." He set the plate down on the bench behind him. The prince nodded. "Of course." Jacob rose. He walked over and bent low so that only he, Caleb, and the Duke could hear. "The Kelin prisoner has requested an audience. He also says he will say nothing but to the 3 of us." "Absolutely not!" Farallon bellowed. Caleb glanced back toward the benches. Everyone was staring. The knight pursed his lips and whispered, "You must consider the possibility that he is a Kelin renegade." The Duke rolled his eyes. "And he claimed to be married to an elf who died just before he stepped into our lives. We remember the last time a Kelin promised to be different. The one who wielded that silent weapon." Jacob shrugged. "Or, my Lord Duke, we're so blinded by our previous knowledge of the Kelin that we cannot see the truth. After all, the humans told us the truth in their trial. They told us their truth, Captain. It does not make the prisoner credible. And he says he escaped the banishment, which is absolutely a lie." Caleb frowned. Perhaps we should hear what he has to say and decipher our truth from it. Farallon inhaled to speak, but the doors at the end of the hall cracked open, and several hooded figures slipped into the room. Caleb half rose out of his seat. "Who?" he mouthed. The shortest of the newcomers tossed back his hood. Tousled auburn hair adorned a young face marked with nervous golden eyes. "Absalom," the crown prince breathed. He threw himself away from his chair and caught the younger elf in an embrace. Absalom hugged him so hard that Caleb wheezed to inhale. Caleb pushed the boy back and held him by the shoulders. "You made it." He choked down the emotions in his voice, but he could feel them drowning him from the inside. None of the other members of the council had even raised their eyebrows at this display. He gasped for breath. "You must tell me of your escape." Absalom nodded. "Of course." He blinked back tears. "I missed you. I so feared that... He broke off with a sob in his voice. "And I as well." Caleb embraced his brother again. "I'm so glad you're safe." "Are we?" Jacob whispered. The younger prince took a seat on a bench, and Caleb returned to his chair. He looked into the eyes of everyone present. Each was vital to their survival as a kingdom, he told himself. He tried not to flinch at the thought of one of them being a traitor. His gaze wandered over to the Duke. But he'd always been a loyal friend of his father's. He'd fought the Kelin to their banishment. It couldn't be possible. Caleb cleared his throat. He caught Absalom's eye and gulped back another sob of relief. Then he raised his gaze to the others. "The Kelin want our people slain because their hate demands it and nothing less." He swallowed. "We are here in Riverfall because Long-Range Palace has been abandoned for the first time in history. The elven court has never been forced to seek sanctuary before now." He lifted his chin higher. "However, that changes nothing." Gasps raced around the room. The prince's gaze focused on the map. "It changes nothing. We are still the same people. We are willing to fight. We shall not continue to run while the storm readers nip at our heels." "But we don't even know," Amthros began. "Where shall we begin, my prince?" Evelyn interrupted, sitting straight with her hands in her lap. Caleb rubbed his forehead, but nodded his thanks to her. "Saving our people." He spread an opening hand toward the map. "Their attacks have been chaotic at best and far apart." Fires of burned cities and towns glowed. "So they can't simply be marching across our lands." He sank back into his chair. Absalom gulped and said, "Brother, we have to go home. Once we're there, we can access the whole of the kingdom." The features of the map lost their brilliant colors and fell into the floor. Immediately, another meticulous, perfect image of the elven palace and its hinterlands rose. A fire sprouted into life above the royal residence. The crown prince's eyes reflected the magic flames. "Not yet. First, we must determine what to do about this supposed elf spy for the Kelin, or we waste any plans we make here." "There's a spy?" exploded one of the ladies as her face flushed. She smoothed her ivory dress. Caleb remembered that she was the mayor of Riverfall, and he was certain he'd met her before, but he did not recall her name. Nearly everyone in the room edged to the lip of their seats. The prince held up his hands. "Perhaps, and it may be someone of rank, but I do not want to believe that there is indeed a traitor amongst us." He licked his lips and tried to keep from looking at Farallon. "I wholeheartedly wish that it is just an attempt to sow discord at a time when we need trust the most. And our Kelin prisoner could so easily be lying," he thought. "They assume we have a weakness for children and won't kill Thalon." Which wasn't wrong, he admitted. But what could an elven traitor, if there was one, hope to gain against the Kelin? There was no compromise. They'd proven that during the last war. He rubbed his forehead again. He couldn't just excuse the Duke from this council. If he did, he doubted Farallon would even leave, and then how much less authority would he have? "Prince Edelon," the mayor eased. He flinched. He didn't want to hear that name. Jacob cleared his throat, and attention shifted over to him. However, the possibility of a spy is not prudent to ignore. They trapped us on the river when they should have never known we were there. What could ever possess an elf to turn on this kingdom? Demanded the mayor. Jacob grunted. Perhaps someone wants to improve his or her own rank. Caleb stiffened and watched as the thoughts settled across their faces. Farallon shot out of his seat and stormed into the illusion of the map. Such a suggestion is insulting, Dragoon. But you cannot understand, since you're not of Indeleria. Jacob's face didn't move a muscle. Caleb tensed as Farallon spun toward him. The Duke spat. This is outrageous. What you have not said is that the source of this information about a spy is a Kelin, and there are no Kelin traitors. How do you think they found us on the river? He told them. There is no disloyal elf, it's all that Kelin. Caleb caught Jacob and Amthros watching the Duke coolly. He tried to match their expressions. Alsalon spun toward him. If a Kelin told you this, why would you ever believe it, brother? The young prince is wise, the mayor of Riverfall affirmed. Farallon coughed, and the elves who had been on the river did not meet each other's eyes. Caleb sighed. Because this Kelin has a son. The mayor of Riverfall shook her head. The Kelin have many children. No. Caleb struggled to push the air out of his lungs. The child is half elven. The following silence fell as thick as a blanket smothering a fire. We'd heard rumors since you've arrived, the mayor whispered. But how could one of us— Farallon muttered. Maybe our prisoner killed the elf in the wildlands before we discovered their camp. Hidden with a bow in the night, so the humans just blamed it on the cultists. The mayor protested. None of this makes sense. The Kelin were banished. How would that have been possible? Lady Sabiel lifted her chin. How did they escape? How did any of this happen? Perhaps they've been back long before they assaulted us. Evelyn looked down at the map. They're resourceful. We weren't watching. They must have been plotting this since the day they were thrown off this world, and they are likely the very same enemies we fought before. Disenflayed. Farallon coughed into his hand. Those are memories. Remember, children born to immortal parents are immortal. They all had to be killed or banished, every single one of them. We can't even spare their children. We made that mistake before. He hesitated. That's why King Valadin chose to banish them. Amthros stared down at his hands. He curled his fingers toward his body. I don't think I could defend my life again. Even bringing those memories alive is a tragedy, Lady Sabiel snapped. Evelyn shook her head at the Duke. Life is sacred, my lord. It is our duty as immortals not to forget that, as they have. They're still human, he snapped back. They just didn't die when they were supposed to. Evelyn kept her gaze steady. Would you also impose blanket death on regular humans too, my lord? Farallon scowled at her. Caleb pressed his lips together, keeping himself from speaking. Amthros ran his hands over his face. The world needs it to be this way, doesn't it? Slaughter in exchange for slaughter. He cracked his knuckles, and the elves flinched as he did so. He sighed. We have no way to end this war quickly. This could persist for centuries if we don't act now. Draw them out. We need a battle. Caleb sat back as he watched as one of the other elves shook his head. He didn't recognize the speaker. The unfamiliar elf said, A fool's errand, Sir Amthros. Such rash action will only get us exposed and killed. I believe it to be our best choice. To end this now. Lady Eve frowned. No, Sir Knight. Patience may be our ally, even throughout the horrors we endure. We don't know how they're back, so how could we defend against that? Surely you know something. Lady Sabiel stared at Evelyn. "What I suspect is irrelevant," Lady Eve replied. Surely more than suspect, Caleb thought, but he held his tongue. The mayor held Evelyn's gaze. "And why would you say that?" The cook presented a winsome smile. "Unfortunately, I have said all that I can offer." Amthros persisted. "No, we should draw out their army. We must lead them away from destroying more hapless towns and people. We need them to come to us." "We don't have the soldiers to field against them," Lady Sabiel protested. She glanced at Jacob. "And Sylvedon is smaller than most people think," the knight captain finished. "We're not enough to cover Indaleria's countryside, and that's if you allow our mixed-race soldiers into the kingdom. And even with the tree paths, gathering and marching is not instant. And frankly, I am not comfortable discussing battle strategy with all ears open right now." The elves shifted their weights and looked away. Caleb took in a deep breath before speaking, waiting for the others to be silent. "Our captive Kelin must have lied to us. I trust everyone in this room." He put both his arms on their armrests. "So speak freely." He knew he was contradicting what he had said earlier, but he couldn't make himself believe that Farallon could be a traitor. The Duke had been part of his family all his life. His gaze drifted over to his brother as he realized Farallon was speaking. "We don't know where they are, or how many of them there are. We can't guess where they will strike next. We know they want the princes, so perhaps here is their next target." "They should not be able to strike here, even if the spy told them," the mayor replied. "But other places were more magically guarded than this." She cast her gaze down at the palace on the map. Lady Eve looked at Caleb. "It's obvious the seals on Darkrain were not enough. Perhaps we should do more to encourage those locks and banish them again." Amthros growled. "We can't go through this a third time. Destroy them all, except the children. We can teach them better this time since we know what to expect." Jacob shook his head at Caleb. The prince tried to keep a straight expression. "What can we do?" Alsalon asked. "Return to long range?" "No." The Dragoon Knight didn't raise his eyes from the map as it changed back to show the whole kingdom, and the palace became a small, burning spot. "Stop fleeing. Gather your people from across the kingdom and move away from the cities, since those seem to be targets." "And how would we do that?" Amthros queried. "Rescuing people, while honorable, does not save us from the threat." Jacob frowned. "It saves them. And for now we must have a goal we can attain. Got to climb a mountain one stone at a time." Farallon waved a hand at the map. "They expect us to attack long range. They want us to attack our own sacred ground." "Do they still have a force there?" the Dragoon asked. "Or did they just piss on it and chase after the rest of us?" "Mind your tongue, sir," yipped Lady Sabiel. He shrugged, and Caleb watched him turn his attention back to the miniature palace on the map. The captain continued, "Long range would be a fool's errand. It's empty of your people. We would only damage it and the lands around it, losing more lives in the process." "They want that," the Duke snarled as he folded his arms. Caleb pursed his lips and nodded. The glowing ghost of a palace in the mountains absorbed his gaze. Home. "Then that is a fight we shall avoid. It must be freed by victory elsewhere." "Well, where could we strike with victory assured?" Alsalon asked. "I'm not sure there is such a place," Jacob answered. Caleb cocked his head, staring at the map. His gaze drifted to the walls. "Is something wrong, my prince?" the Duke asked. Caleb peered at the ivy-enshrouded wall. Finally, he shook his head. "No, I thought I heard something. There have also been attacks along the Pelopon River." Caleb looked at the elf who had spoken, and the prince sought for his name in his memory. He'd seen him before in his father's court. The elf continued to speak as more illusory fires began to glow over destroyed towns. I doubt they will remain there, though. On the map, the river flowed down through a canyon between the encircling mountains and toward the lands to the south of the kingdom. Lady Eve closed her sapphire eyes. I heard a silence on the wind blowing up the river. The rumor may be true. They may have that sword again. It was destroyed, said the elf whose name Caleb was still fighting to remember. We watched it melt. No one spoke for a moment, each dwelling on the memories and stories of that noiseless blade and the warrior who wielded it. The Crown Prince frowned. I was not there, but I know the tales and they frighten me. The silent sword. His eyes drifted over to Anthros and its wielder. He dropped his gaze back to the map. Anthros waved at the map. We need to find them before we can truly plan against them. He scanned the whole of the kingdom with its many fires. And we must act soon. You have no army, Jacob stated. You're scattered, the dragoons are on their way, but I fear they may not make it in time. We need to act now, Farallon growled. Caleb watched him narrow his eyes at the map. He followed his gaze to the Duke's domain in the north and the fires raging over it. Farallon's voice burned. Lest they continue to snap at our heels until we've no feet left with which to run. There was a loud crack and muffled cursing behind the wall of ivy. The elves turned with widening eyes. Jacob rose from his seat, balling a fist. Caleb swallowed his rising bile, but something about the imprecations didn't sound Kelin in nature. Damn! A voice called from the top of the wall. The owner of the voice's foot slipped on a vine and lost balance entirely. Dare hung upside down for an instant before the vine trapping her ankle snapped and she plummeted to the floor.